about in this Bible study tonight, called Out of Debt. Be thinking about what you do in this situation. A man sitting across the table from me moved between anger and tears. His brother, who was also his business partner, had brought the company to the verge of bankruptcy for the third time. He gets in trouble and starts siphoning off our money, my friend explained, and then when we need the extra cash, it's gone. The man's brother was a Christian. Every time his misuse of company funds was exposed, he admitted his wrong and begged for forgiveness. This time, his wounded brother wasn't sure if he had the strength to forgive him again. What would you do?
I can't answer that because I'm having a struggle myself.
Okay. Been there doing that. No right, wrong answers.
I mean, I know that it says 70 times 7, 1,000,000 times. But how many times do you have to keep putting yourself out there to have to talk to yourself, well, I need to forgive? I'm about over it.
You're at 70 times 6, right? Like the last, or 489 waiting on the last one. How would you feel if you were the brother and had to keep asking forgiveness? What do you think he was feeling?
Shame.
Shame?
I don't believe he probably actually thought he needed to.
Needed
Just
to.
convenient for him to ask for forgiveness, then he did it again.
Comes over that way. You know, and again, one thing Pat kind of alluded to, the accountability. You know, for my part, I take that extra money and put it in an account that doesn't have his name on it. So it wouldn't be, it's obviously an issue for him. You know, some people can walk around with $10 in their pocket and it lasts forever, never and ever. Some people walk around with $10 and it's gone by noon. And so sometimes, I'm not going to ask who's in which camp, sometimes, you know, we have to either put some restraints on ourselves or if we're in a relationship to help with each other with that. One of the things I talk to people about in pre-marriage counseling is your money. And I say, now, it's not up to me to tell you how to do it, but you need to talk about it. And my little story about that is I had 2 guys come to me for counseling. I think it was here in Roanoke. Sweet, sweet, sweet young boys. And they had had a fight the night before. And when I came in, they told me that. And they were still all upset. And I thought, oh, here we go. Well, they had $12 till the first of the month. And after the fight, one of the boys went out and bought the boyfriend $10 worth of flowers to make up for the fight, which then left them $2 till the end of the month. So it was like, well, that was sweet, but couldn't you just like take him a picture of the flowers or something? Let's look at this account. And we're going to read it first. You can read it from whatever translation you want to. I tend to use NIV in the Message. How about if somebody reads 21 through 25?
I'll go. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times, Jesus said to him. Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him, and as he could not pay, his Lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children, and all his possessions, and payment to be made.
26 through 31.
The poor wretch threw himself at the king's feet and begged, "Give me a chance and I'll pay it all back." Touched by his plea, the king let him off, erasing the debt. The servant was no sooner out of the room when he came upon one of his fellow servants who owed him $10. He seized him by the throat and demanded, "Pay up now." The poor wretch threw himself down and begged, "Give me a chance and I'll pay it all back." But he wouldn't do it. He had him arrested and put in jail until the debt was paid. When the other servants saw this going on, they were outraged and brought a detailed report to the king.
The king summoned the man and said, "You evil servant, I forgave your your entire debt when you beg me for mercy? Shouldn't you be compelled to be merciful to your fellow servant who asked for mercy? The king was furious and put the screws to the man until he paid back his entire debt. And that's exactly what my parent in heaven is going to do to each of you who doesn't forgive unconditionally anyone who asks for mercy. You ever heard this story before? It's interesting, I've always heard it 7 times 70, but in some translations it comes out 77. Be thinking about this through these questions, because we can't always take everything that Jesus used in the parable and directly apply it to our individual life. Think about how it fits. First question says, do you think Peter had a special reason for asking Jesus how often he was required to forgive the person who sins against him? You know, Peter always jumps in and says something. Did he have a reason for asking that?
Evidently he did, he asked. I don't know what it would be, except, if I forgive 3 times and then I don't have to forgive anymore.
And the 3 times is interesting because in Judaism, they were required or encouraged to forgive 3 times. Anything over 3 times, you were being overly kind and generous. And so Peter thought he was, going to get good points, brownie points from Jesus, because he said, how about 7 times? And sometimes I look at this picture of Jesus going, I just don't get it. And so instead of 7, he said 70 times 7. The religious leaders taught that 3 times was the limit on forgiveness. Peter thought he was being gracious to extend it to 7. What does Jesus' answer tell you about how forgiveness works in Jesus' dominion? The Jewish teaching was 3. Now Jesus is saying either 77 or 7 times 70.
Always forgive.
Always. Always. Way more than they were expected to be. And you might say, well, why are these disciples having such a nitpicking time with this? As I've talked about so many times, even though they had followed Jesus and been with him a couple of years at this point, they were raised Jewish. Just like some of you, when you make comments and things, I go, she was raised Baptist. She was raised Lutheran. And as much as we want to step out of that, and sometimes we finally can, it kind of is ingrained. It's sort of like if you've ever been in a liturgical church and somebody says, the Lord be with you, what do you say back? And also with you. You don't even think about it. It just comes. And so he thought he was being really, look how good I am, Jesus. I'm going to stretch it to 7. But instead, Jesus has a little more idea. And the idea is Jesus teaching them is whatever you've been taught, there's so much more. There's so much more. And I always say these, it says your, but we'll say anybody. What is your attitude when you're asked to forgive someone for the same offense 3 or 4 times? We already know what Pat's attitude is. Jesus.
It's hard to get fed up.
No, pardon?
You're a human, it's hard to get fed
Oh,
up.
I'm not picking on her for that, but yeah.
No, I'm saying that's what my answer was.
Yeah.
My answer was too, fed up.
I think my word that comes up quick is frustrating. I want to say, what is with you? What is with you? And then I look in the mirror and I go, why am I putting up with this? Why am I putting myself in that position? There are things you know not to ask somebody to do, whether it's as a friend or in the church, because as much as their heart wants to say, yeah, I'll do that. But many of you have heard over the years, my answer to that is, don't tell me yes. Show me no. So I think it's, like you said, it's a human thing to get frustrated, to get angry, and then to get angry with yourself for putting yourself in that position. Because most of the time when we end up in these kind of situations, it's not totally on the other person. If I were to start talking about Virginia Tech football tonight, one person in this room I clearly know, and a couple others I know, but one has the hat on, would know that they would not like me saying that. And if I pushed it and pushed it and pushed it,
Hey, I like you too.
if I pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, and she got mad at me, that would be totally all her fault. So sometimes we have to look at our own reactions, our part in it, our attitudes, when these kind of things come up and start bothering us. Does Jesus' command to forgive without limits mean that we are not to hold others accountable for what they do? Pat goes,
No, I think
I
you can.
think we have to hold them accountable. The good Lord holds us accountable, but, you know, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm having such a difficult time with my forgiveness, and I have to think about, well, how many times do I screw up and he forgives me? But you still don't make me not be tired of it.
what are you going to say, Sandra?
You can forgive someone, but still hold them accountable to correct their mistake without
Yeah.
being cruel.
Forgiving is not the same as not holding accountable. But sometimes people have to be shown, told what they've done that was out of line. Even if they come and say, I'm sorry. It's like with a little kid, we talked about this before. Do they really know what they're saying I'm sorry for, or is that just to get out of it? Like what Betty was saying about the man with the debt in the company. Sometimes being a true friend and a true Christian friend is to help somebody see where they might be out of line with whatever they did they needed forgiveness for. Does that make sense? And even as adults, you say, well, they should be adult enough to know what they've done. Some people just don't get it. They just don't get it. When the king canceled the servant's enormous debt, the king took the loss himself. What insight does that give you about what it means for us to forgive others?
Suck it up and forgive.
I think we take a lot of loss in heaven, on the earth, but to lose on the earth means we gain in heaven.
And it could very well cost you. It could not just in money, but may cost you in patience. It may cost you in the friendship. How many friendships do we know that got messed up because somebody really messed up? And forgiveness, even if verbally happened, it couldn't happen to rebuild that relationship. So there's going to be cost. Anytime you deal with people, even in the good times, there's going to be cost. Because you're going to be giving some of yourself in that situation. The comparison between the two debts, according to the book I was using, is 600,000 to 1. The first servant was forgiven $600,000 debt and choked his fellow slave for $1. Or another one said that it involved a talent which was a 20-year salary compared to a one-day salary. What does this show you about the first servant's attitude toward the king's mercy and grace? Didn't appreciate it? What else?
He didn't change his heart.
Took it for granted. And you notice it wasn't just money it was going to cost him. Who was going to be arrested? His wife and his kids. Kind of like the debtor's prisons you read about Charles Dickens. You know, they took everything. Took everything. And he somehow or another, it didn't touch him. Have you ever thought about or been around somebody who's been given and given and forgiven and forgiven, and they just assume that's going to happen? Now that's a frustrating thing for me. You know, they just assume it's going to happen. The enormity of the difference in this, is something that really always catches my attention. The parable is obviously not about how to treat people who owe you money. What are the two debts represented in our lives? And what contrast does Jesus want us to gather? Jesus talked a lot about money, but it seldom had to do with money. He's usually teaching a lesson around it somehow. So what are we supposed to get for this? I owe a lot of money sometimes in my life, and I don't owe anybody 20 years salary. We're not talking about money, what are we talking about? Blank space in the cemetery. Talking about forgiveness of God to us. You know, like Pat said, she thinks about how many times she's missed the mark, how many times she's fallen away, and God always takes her back. Now, part of me wants to say that's why God has that job and we don't, because God has the mercy and the love to keep doing that. But I think it does say something about how we treat each other. Not just if they actually owe us something. How many of you have ever had anybody owe you any money in your life? Anybody? Most of us have at some point in time. Some of us probably want to raise 2 hands. And did that interfere with your relationship with them? In some cases. Especially if, what's that thing in Popeye, I'll pay you gladly on Wednesday or whatever? You know, that day comes and comes and comes, and you see them going out and doing other things. What starts building up? Animosity, resentment. And guess who that bothers? Us, not that other person. The other person, sometimes they don't even remember they owed you money. You know? And again, taking Pat's comparison, I go back to putting a little bit of human form on God. How must God feel when we walk away, screw up, and don't even say I'm sorry, and surely don't even ask forgiveness? Just go, oh, mess that one up. Keep going. Keep going. And notice I keep saying us, not y'all, us. So Jesus is trying to teach something here about the enormity of God's forgiveness for us, which then might trickle down to realizing how much we need to forgive other people. If we refuse to forgive others, what happens in our lives?
Eats away at us.
Pardon?
Said it just eats away at us.
Eats away. Eats away. I think it definitely interferes, besides eating away, it interferes with our relationship with God and probably with other people. Let's say I owed Sherry $200, and I kept telling her I was going to pay her. I'm going to pay you. I'm going to pay you. And it's gone on and on and on. And Sherry's got some extra money. She's going to Florida. She's got lots of extra money. She got this extra money. And somebody comes up who really needs $10. Now, Sherry wouldn't do this because she's a kind-hearted woman. But wouldn't it be easy for her to go, I'm not giving anybody else any money? So sometimes that not only blocks our relationship with God and with each other, but future relationships. Future relationships. Now please hear, none in this lesson says, go borrow all the money you want, never pay it back, and then it'll be okay. If you find a place that'll do that for you, call me. But what it does is shows me again over and over and over how much more abundantly gracious and giving and forgiving God is. And if I want to reflect that God in my life, then it calls me to forgive. Does that make sense? Verse 35 says, this is how my heavenly parent will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Does God forgive us only on the condition we forgive others? That's Kate has in trouble. Again, that gets back to what kind of theology you were raised with. Were you raised with a theology where if you don't do good stuff, God's not going to do good stuff for you? If you don't do good stuff, God's going to get you. Again, we go back to who suffers when we don't forgive other people. We do, because eventually it catches up. It may not be when you're out having fun and partying or whatever, but you know at 3 o'clock in the morning when you have to get up for another reason, and you walk in the bathroom and you turn the light on, that's when you have to face you. That's when I have to face me. And so sometimes I think if we can ever get a grip on God's forgiveness, then we can have a sense of forgiveness for other people. How can we demonstrate God's mercy in a practical way to someone who has wronged us? Notice I'm not talking about money. Didn't see anything about money on that one. How can we demonstrate God's mercy in a practical way to someone who has wronged us? Has anyone ever been wronged in here? Not if you're not going to put your hand. In a practical way. I love how that says that. In a practical way. How can we demonstrate God's mercy?
So then compassion.
How?
How? By not strangling them.
I'm not going to repeat that. If you think I'm going to take it, it's fine.
It's,
You don't have to keep working on it. Practical way. Pray for them.
Still be nice to them.
Hmm?
Still be nice to
Just
them.
be nice to them, speak to them. You know, there have been people in my life that I've wronged, and when they have forgiven me and still speak to me, that's so great. That's so great. Because a lot of times if you wrong somebody, even if you go and apologize, what happens? Turn them out, turn and walk away. Turn and walk away. Practical ways to show God's mercy. It may be inviting them to go do something. Inviting to church for Friends Sunday, October 6th. It may be in some way doing something you know they need. You know, perhaps sometimes we see, especially in our neighborhoods, we have one lady in our neighborhood who nobody but Joanne and I like. And she can come across just as harsh and grumpy as the day is long. And I'm sure there are people there, if she had a flat tire, we wouldn't stop to tell her she had a flat tire. Now, there may be some that would still do it out of the kindness of their heart. But when we first met her 3 years ago, you know Joanna, Joanna would talk to that tripod. Joanna talks to everybody. And this person said, don't let them see you talking to me or they won't talk to you. And her answer real quick was, too bad. Too bad, I'm not going to let somebody tell me who I can talk to and who I can't. So in a sense, not that I speak to this woman to dump mercy on her, it does that, and it testifies to other people. Because we've had some folks come and say, why do you talk to her? Why does she come in your house? You know, well, she's a neat person, you get over yourself. But you know, she's one of these rule keepers. One of those rule keepers. If you don't do it by the rule, you're terrible. So we've had 3 lessons so far on forgiveness. What's been the challenge for you? The first lesson we had talked about why we need forgiveness. We didn't have too much trouble with that. Most of us can click on the fact that we need forgiveness from God, whether or not we need it from anybody else or not. We had one about God's forgiveness, and then this one tonight about out of debt. What if we talked about that you're still sitting there thinking, I don't get it, I don't believe it, I don't want to think about it. It's all right to say that. I won't keep you after school.
I struggle with the last one.
This one we just did?
Yeah, well, the last comment about demonstrating God's mercy. If I see them do the same things, same sort of things to other people, it's like that much harder.
And that's one of those places where accountability comes in. I've seen people who have a pattern of hurting, abusing, mistreating people. And maybe because I'm the pastor, I'm just outspoken. If I see it start developing again, I've been known to go to that person and say, you know, I've noticed this pattern, and I hope you aren't acting in that anymore, but I've noticed and I hope you're not doing that. Does that take a lot of nerve? Yeah. It doesn't always get received well. But yeah, it's harder when you see somebody continually doing that. Like the man in the story. First time he came to his brother, he said, you know, money got tight, and I had to take some money out of the till, and I'm really sorry. I'm sure the brother thought, That's all right, we'll get it together. And let's say 6 months later, he came again and said, you know, I didn't make all the sales I thought I was gonna make, and I'm short of money, so I borrowed some money again. How much had you paid back the first time? You said none. So the second time, and the brother says, okay, how would the brother feel the third time? As brothers, I probably would have jerked him up and said, we weren't raised this way. We weren't raised this way. What are you doing? And the other thing that concerned me when I read that is, what's he doing with the money? You know, is there a habit involved that's causing this money to disappear? Is he living above his means? But yeah, going back to the showing mercy. We get so caught up in just being ourselves and living our lives. We forget how to actively show mercy. Tell me a way, come Sunday morning, when you're coming in or as you're in church, you can show mercy. Forget the forgiveness part. You can show mercy, love, and acceptance to someone. You know, there's so many in this room that when they see a new person come in or somebody they haven't seen in a while, they immediately go over to them, give them a hug, start talking to them, asking about whatever they know about. Do they get paid to go do that? Do they get extra brownie points? No, it's just something they do. Sometimes showing mercy is telling someone where the restroom is, you know, especially visitors. Showing mercy is not waking somebody up when they're sleeping during your sermon. That's a challenge. Mercy sometimes is understanding somebody's having a bad day. Why do we have so many tissues in the church? Why are the tissues almost every pew?
A lot of crying going on in here sometimes.
A crying going on? A crying going on? Well, have you ever cried in the church that wasn't MCC? Do they have tissues everywhere for you? Sometimes, not always. And the other thing is, I heard a couple people say when they came in, especially the first time, and they're just boo-hooing, and they said, nobody looked at me weird. And I said, well, no tissues, you're not the only one. And they said, if anybody does anything, they just come over and gently touch my arm. That is showing mercy. That is showing mercy. Out of debt. Out of debt. One more quick thing. You're talking about the 7 and 70 times 7. In the Hebrew faith, numbers have a big importance. And 7 is the number of completeness. Completeness. And when Jesus said the 77, or the 70 times 7, he used one of his favorite things, a part of English language called hyperbole. When he says something that is so outlandish. So what he was saying, don't count up. Don't be counting 439, not 489. Yeah, when he uses a number that just is so gigantic, so over-encompassing. It's also, in the Jewish faith, every letter has a number. Every letter has a number. And the letter 7 is associated with the word T-A-M-I-M, which means completion. So again, that idea of Jesus trying to say, do it completely. What about false forgiveness? Where does that help you or against you? Somebody comes and says, I come to Norman Nelson and I say, Nelson, I messed your name up 15 times, and I'm really sorry. And the next Sunday I come up and call him Norman again. And I say the same thing over and over. How do you feel about people asking falsely for forgiveness? I find it very frustrating. Very frustrating. If they mean it, you don't mean it. Not to mean it, don't mean it, so you're going to mean it. The last one in our series is forgiving when we don't feel like it. Forgiving when we don't feel like it. I really didn't make these up, okay? I didn't make them up, and if the shoe fits, then shoe fits. But I want you this week to simply think about some time when you've forgiven and whether you did feel like it or not. Because you're going to come back and tell me, you don't have to use names, you don't have to use details. you're gonna come back and tell me about sometime you had to forgive somebody. I'm afraid to go back there and look at that.
It's fair, isn't it?
I realize we're going back close to the camera, might scare somebody. Any last minute prayer requests or praises? I have a praise that you probably saw if you're on Facebook. And that's that Kelly's been accepted to a master's program for an MDiv. And I'm excited about that. I think it's going to be great for her. You know what happens to people who take MDivs, don't you? They end up being
Crazy.
they end up being broke, they end up being tired, but in the long run, they often end up being pastors. So that's a great blessing. And each one of you all will have a piece in her future ministry by the way you encourage her and support her. Loving God, we all stand in need of your forgiveness. Sometimes for big things, and sometimes for just silly, stupid things we've done. And we know that you don't put numbers or prices or size on that. But like I preached on the other Sunday, anything that separates us instead of bringing us nearer to you, that's something we need to ask forgiveness for. Be with folks that will be traveling this week, with folks who are starting new ventures, with decisions that need to be made in our country, in our church, and help us when the fire marshal comes. In your name we pray. Amen.